The penthouse was Damian Blackwood's fortress of solitude, a glass and steel kingdom hovering above the common world. He stood before the wall of windows, the city lights twinkling like a universe of surrendered stars. He was on the phone, his voice a low, controlled storm. "Harrison, my patience is not a renewable resource. Lawson signs the deal by Friday with my amendments, or I will not just bury his company, I will bury his legacy. Make sure he understands the distinction." He terminated the call. The silence was immediately filled by a softer sound, the whisper of a cloth gliding over glass. He turned. The maid, Elena, was there, a slight figure in a dull grey uniform, polishing a vast window, her reflection a ghost in the cityscape. "You," he said, the cloth stilled. "The light from the Chandler building is distracting. Adjust the blinds." She didn't turn. "That's the Orion constellation, sir, specifically Betelgeuse. The blinds won't help. It will move in about 20 minutes. A beat of stunned silence. Damien felt a flicker of irritation, hot and sharp. "Are you an astrophysicist?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "No, sir." "Then adjust the blinds." A pause, then a quiet, "As you wish." She moved to the panel, and the motorized blinds descended, cutting the majestic view into sterile, manageable strips. Her obedience was perfect, yet it felt like a subtle rebellion. "Coffee black now." She was a phantom, disappearing and reappearing without a sound. She placed the white porcelain cup on the far corner of his obsidian desk. He took a swift, impatient gulp and slammed it down, the hot liquid sloshing over the rim. "This is swill. It's bitter and cold." "It's 94 degrees Celsius, sir." The bitterness suggests over-extraction, likely from the grind being too fine for the pressure. The machine needs calibration. He stood up, his chair rolling back with a sharp sound. "Are you now a barista? Do you have an opinion on everything in this house?" Her hazel eyes met his, and for the first time he saw they weren't docile. They were intelligent, analytical, and deeply tired. "I simply understand the machinery, sir, both the one that brews coffee and the one that runs this penthouse." "Get out." She left. The air felt charged, unsettled. Damien tried to focus on the Lawson file, but the numbers blurred. Her words echoed. "Understand the machinery." It was an odd, technical thing for a maid to say. Sleep was a traitor that night. The Lawson deal was a locked door, and he couldn't find the key. At 2:46 a.m., he gave up and went to his study for a brandy. The door was ajar. Light bled into the hall. His blood ran cold. He pushed the door open. Elena was at his desk, but she wasn't cleaning. She was hunched over his financial projections, her maid's uniform replaced by a simple sweater and jeans, a calculator in one hand, his confidential files scattered before her. The sight was so bizarre, so violating, that for a second he was speechless. Then the fury came. "Find what you were looking for." His voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "I assume Lawson is paying you well for this." She jumped, spinning around. Panic flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly mastered, replaced by that infuriating calm. "Your encryption is 6 years out of date. Your head of it is either incompetent or on someone's payroll." He strode forward, his shadow falling over her. "That is not an answer. What are you doing?" "Preventing you from making a $53 million mistake," she said, her gaze steady. She tapped a page. "This revenue projection for their subsidiary, Logistica, is a fantasy. The numbers are built on a recursive algorithm designed to hide losses. It's a house of cards." He laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You expect me to believe that you, a maid, can spot a financial algorithm that my entire team missed? I don't expect you to believe me. I expect you to be pragmatic enough to check. Run a liquidity analysis on Logistica, cross-referenced with their parent company's debt servicing. The numbers won't add up. They're insolvent, and this merger is their lifeline." He moved closer, invading her space. He could see the faint pulse at the base of her throat. "Who are you?" The question was a demand. She held her ground, though he saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped the desk. "I'm the ghost in your machine, Mr. Blackwood, and I just prevented a catastrophic system failure." You're fired. A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. No, I'm not. You're going to go to your computer right now and start that analysis. Because the one thing you hate more than being disobeyed is being wrong. And you need to know if I'm right. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his arm. A scent of soap and something else, like old books, lingered in the air. She was gone, leaving him standing in the wake of her audacity. His heart hammered, not just from anger, but from a thrilling, terrifying curiosity. She was right. He was already mentally compiling the data. He worked until dawn. When the sun rose, it illuminated the truth on his screen. The discrepancy was there, 53 million, almost to the dollar. It was impossible, but it was real. When she arrived at 8 a.m., he was waiting, holding 2 cups of coffee. 94 degrees, he said, his voice raw. She took the cup. I know. You were right. I know. How, he asked, the word laden with a weight he didn't understand. She looked at him, and for the first time, the calm in her eyes seemed fragile. That's a story with a very high price, Damien. He started at the use of his first name. It felt like a key turning in a lock. I can afford it. Can you, she whispered, her gaze drifting to the city. The price isn't money, it's the truth. And the truth got me here, hiding in plain sight as your maid. Before he could respond, his personal phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. He glanced at it, and his blood ran cold. It was a single, grainy photograph of Elena entering his building a month ago. The text below read, "We know who she is, do you?" He looked up at her, his mind reeling. The mystery had just become a threat. The phone felt like a live wire in Damien's hand. The grainy photo of Elena, the anonymous text, it was a targeted strike. He slowly lowered the device, his eyes locking with hers. The fragile moment of connection shattered, replaced by a chilling, shared understanding. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were prey. What is it? Elena's voice was barely a whisper, all trace of its earlier calm gone, replaced by a raw fear he recognized instantly. It was the same look he'd seen in boardrooms right before a hostile takeover, the moment a target knew they were cornered. Wordlessly, he turned the screen toward her. She paled, her hand flying to her mouth. The coffee cup she held trembled, threatening to spill. They found me. The words were a broken breath. She took a step back, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting it to be kicked in. Who are they? Damien's voice was low and steady, a stark contrast to the storm in his eyes. He moved toward her, not as a threat, but as a barrier between her and the unseen danger. Ilara, who is after you? The name, her real name, hung in the air. She flinched at its sound, a name she had buried. Julian, she choked out. Julian Croft. He never stopped looking. I thought I'd been careful. I erased everything. He didn't build an empire on your algorithm just to let you disappear, Damien said, his mind already shifting from curiosity to strategy. The billionaire was back, the predator assessing a new threat to his territory, and she was in his territory. What does he want? To silence me permanently. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and lost in the vast, sterile kitchen. The patents are one thing, but I have the original lab journals, the proof that the algorithm was mine from the beginning. He knows I have them. He thinks I'm a loose end. Where are they? A storage locker, under a false name. I can get them. No, Damien said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We will get them together. He picked up his phone again, his fingers flying across the screen. Alastair, I need a full security sweep on my penthouse now. I also need a vehicle, discreet and armored, ready in the underground garage in 10 minutes, and dig deeper on Julian Croft. I want to know who he uses for his dirty work. He ended the call and looked at her. The fear in her eyes was now mixed with a flicker of awe. You don't have to do this, she said. This is my problem. I'll leave. I'll disappear again. You're not disappearing, he stated, his gaze intense. You're my partner, remember, and no one threatens what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice surprised them both. He wasn't just talking about the business anymore. 20 minutes later, they were in the back of a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows gliding through the city's morning traffic. Alastair was driving, his presence a silent assurance of competence. The tension in the cabin was a physical thing. "Where to?" Damien asked. Elena gave an address in a part of the city Damien hadn't visited in a decade. The journey was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts. He watched her profile, the way she nervously chewed her lip, the way her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. This was the reality of her life, a constant state of vigilance. They reached a nondescript storage facility. Following her directions, Alastair parked near a specific unit. Elena produced a key from a small pouch she wore under her sweater. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get it into the lock. "Let me," Damien said softly. He took the key, his large, steady hand covering her trembling one for a brief moment before he smoothly unlocked the roll-up door. Inside was a Spartan space, a few boxes, and in the center, a single fireproof lockbox. Elena knelt before it, working the combination. The click echoed in the quiet space. She opened the lid. Inside were not digital drives, but old-fashioned, leather-bound notebooks, her life's work. "This is it," she whispered, hugging one to her chest. "This is the truth." Suddenly, Alastair's voice crackled over the discreet comms unit in Damien's ear. "Sir, we have company. A black van just pulled into the lot. No plates." Damien's body went rigid. "Time to go, now." He grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her to her feet. She clutched the lockbox to her chest. They moved quickly toward the SUV, but it was too late. The side door of the van slid open, and two large men in dark clothing jumped out, their intent clear. They moved with a professional brutality that was far more dangerous than common thugs. Alastair stepped forward, placing himself between them and his charges. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice calm. "The briefcase," one of the men grunted, pointing at the lockbox in Ilara's arms. "Hand it over and no one gets hurt." "Not going to happen," Damien said, shoving Ilara behind him. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his head of security. The billionaire was gone, replaced by something primal. The men rushed them. Alastair engaged the first with brutal efficiency, a swift series of blows that sent the man stumbling back. The second man came straight for Damien. Damien wasn't a trained fighter, but he was strong and fueled by a rage he'd never known. He dodged a wild punch and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him against the side of the SUV. In the chaos, Ilara screamed. The first man, recovering, had grabbed her from behind, trying to wrench the lockbox from her grasp. "Let her go," Damien roared, abandoning his own opponent. He lunged, pulling the man off her. They fell to the concrete in a tangle of limbs. Damien took a hard blow to the jaw, the pain exploding white-hot behind his eyes. But he held on, his only thought to protect her. A sharp whistle cut through the air. The two assailants disengaged immediately, sprinting back to their van, which screeched away. It was over as quickly as it began. Damien knelt on the ground, breathing heavily, his knuckles bleeding, his jaw already throbbing. Ilara rushed to his side, her eyes wide with terror and something else, a fierce, blazing gratitude. "You're hurt," she breathed, her fingers gently touching his jaw. He caught her hand, his own blood smearing her skin. He looked from her terrified face to the determined one of Alastair, then back to the lockbox that held her truth. They had come for her in broad daylight. Julian Croft wasn't playing games. He helped her into the SUV, the lockbox safe between them. As they sped away, he knew the dynamic had shifted forever. The intellectual puzzle was now a physical war. And as he looked at the woman beside him, he knew he would burn down the entire world to keep her safe. The armored SUV didn't return to the glittering penthouse. Damien knew it was compromised. Instead, Alastair navigated them to a secure, unlisted property Damien owned on the outskirts of the city, a modern, minimalist house shrouded by trees, its windows reinforced, its security system state-of-the-art. It was a bunker disguised as a home. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a grim, sharp-edged reality in its wake. Damien's jaw ached with a deep, throbbing pain, a constant reminder of the violence that had touched them. Ilara hadn't let go of the lockbox, her knuckles white around its handle, as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Once inside, the heavy door hissed shut, engaging multiple locks. The silence was profound, broken only by their ragged breathing. Damien commanded, his voice gruff as he guided her to a large leather sofa. He disappeared into another room and returned with a first aid kit, his movements stiff. He placed it on the coffee table, but instead of tending to his own injuries, he knelt before her. His large, capable hands, now smudged with dirt and blood, were surprisingly gentle as he took her hands, turning them over to inspect her wrists. Red, angry marks were already blooming where the assailant had grabbed her. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It's you, your face." "It's nothing," he dismissed, his focus entirely on her. He opened an antiseptic wipe, the clinical scent cutting through the air. This might sting. He carefully cleaned the abrasions on her wrists, his touch so light it was barely there. Ilara watched him, this billionaire who fought in parking lots and now tended to her wounds with a concentration usually reserved for billion-dollar deals. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He looked up and saw it. His thumb, of its own volition, came up and brushed it away. The gesture was so tender it shattered her remaining composure. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, a sob catching in her throat. "I brought this to your doorstep. I've put you in danger. You should have just let me go." "Look at me, Ilara." His voice was low, intense, compelling her to meet his gaze. "There is no version of this where I let you go, not after I found you, not after I—" He stopped, the unspoken words hanging between them, more powerful for their silence. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her, with a ferocious protectiveness that stole the air from her lungs, said everything. He finished bandaging her wrists, then stood, moving to a chair opposite her, creating a physical distance he clearly needed to think. The game has changed. They're not just digging for information anymore. They're willing to use force. We need to be smarter and hit harder. He gestured to the lockbox. "The truth is our weapon, but we need to use it correctly. A public dump of evidence will be dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced scientist. We need to orchestrate his downfall. We need to make him destroy himself." A spark of the old fire returned to Ilara's eyes. The genius strategist was reawakening, tempered by fear but not broken by it. "How?" "We give him exactly what he wants," Damien said, a cold, calculating smile touching his lips, a smile that made him look every bit the ruthless corporate raider he was known to be. "We let him think he's won, we'll feed his arrogance, and then we pull the foundation out from under him." For the next few hours, they plotted. The leather-bound journals were spread across the table. Ilara translated her complex notations, explaining the algorithm's foundational flaws Julian had never understood, flaws that were now a ticking time bomb within his own company. Damien listened, absorbed, weaving her technical genius into his web of corporate warfare. He placed calls, his voice a calm, authoritative instrument. He instructed his trading desk to begin quietly acquiring debt tied to Julian's subsidiary companies. He had his PR team prepare a series of seemingly positive press releases about Croft Technologies designed to artificially inflate market confidence. He was building a trap, and every piece was set with precision. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the secure room, the intensity of the day finally caught up with them. The frantic energy faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. Ilara, curled on the sofa, had finally succumbed to sleep, one hand still resting protectively on her journals. Damien watched her. In sleep, the lines of worry smoothed from her face. She looked young, peaceful, the brilliant, terrified, fierce woman who had turned his ordered world upside down. He moved quietly, covering her with a soft blanket. His fingers lingered for a moment, brushing her hair back from her forehead. The urge to lean down and kiss her, to seal this unspoken pact between them, was so strong it was a physical pull. But he resisted. This wasn't the time. He settled into the chair opposite, his body aching, his mind still racing. He was a man who owned cities, who commanded boardrooms, and yet here he was, standing guard over a sleeping woman with a lockbox of secrets, ready to declare war on her behalf. He pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating his determined face in the dark room. He typed a single, decisive message to his most discreet lawyer, a message that would set the final stage. "Draw up the papers. I'm transferring 25% of my equity in Blackwood Global to a new holding company. The beneficiary is Dr. Ilara Vance. He put the phone down. The deed was done. It was no longer just about protection or partnership. It was a vow, a commitment written in the only language he truly trusted, cold, hard assets. She had given him the truth. He was giving her a fortress. As the first light of dawn tinged the sky, Damien Blackwood, the billionaire who had fallen in love with his maid, kept his watch. He wasn't just guarding a person, he was guarding his future. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that the real battle was just beginning. The air in the safe house was thick with anticipation, a silent storm waiting to break. Ilara awoke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Damien standing before a large, smart screen, his profile sharp and focused in the morning light. The transfer of equity, a staggering 25% of his empire, had been more than a business transaction. It was a declaration. She was no longer a hidden maid or a protected partner. She was his equal. They're going to make their move today, Damien said without turning, his eyes fixed on the financial data streaming across the screen. Julian's company, Croft Technologies, is pre-announcing their quarterly earnings. He's going to boast about the algorithm's performance. It's his moment in the sun. Ilara stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Then it's time to give him enough rope to hang himself. Her voice was steady now, the fear replaced by a cool, determined resolve. She opened the lockbox and pulled out a specific journal. The flaw in the Vance algorithm isn't a bug. It's a feature I built in a failsafe. It can't handle extreme market volatility combined with a specific sequence of trades. It will misinterpret the data, creating a feedback loop that looks like massive profit while actually building catastrophic losses. A ruthless smile touched Damien's lips. A beautiful poison pill. How do we activate it? We need to create the perfect storm. A series of seemingly unrelated trades across 3 different markets, executed within a 60-second window. It will look like normal high-frequency activity, but it will be the key that unlocks the flaw. For the next hour, they worked in synchronized harmony. Damien mobilized his entire trading desk, giving them precise, fragmented instructions without revealing the overall strategy. He used his considerable influence to create subtle shifts in the market, preparing the battlefield. Ilara calculated the exact parameters, her mind a supercomputer processing variables at a dizzying speed. The clock ticked toward the market open. The tension was a live wire. At 9:30 a.m., the bell rang. They watched the screens, their hands unconsciously finding each other, fingers lacing together. Julian Croft went on financial news, his face a mask of smug triumph, boasting about his revolutionary algorithm's record-breaking projections. Now, Ilara whispered. Damien gave the final command. Across the globe, a cascade of trades executed, a silent, digital symphony composed by Ilara and conducted by Damien. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker on Croft Technologies' stock chart, a sudden, unnatural spike. It's working, Ilara breathed. The algorithm is misreading the trades. It's interpreting the chaos as a golden opportunity and is leveraging the company's assets to chase a phantom profit. They watched, mesmerized, as the stock soared. Julian, on live television, was ecstatic, taking credit for the unprecedented surge. But Damien and Ilara saw the truth beneath the surface. The algorithm was now operating in a reality of its own making, a house of cards built on a lie. An hour later, the first crack appeared. A savvy analyst noticed the trading patterns didn't match the reported gains. A question was asked, then another. The stock's ascent stalled. And then it collapsed. It wasn't a slow drop. It was a cliff. The flawed algorithm, faced with real-world data it could no longer ignore, began frantically selling to cover the massive, hidden losses it had just created. Panic spread. The numbers on the screen turned from green to a bloody red. In the background of the live news feed, they could see Julian Croft's triumphant smile vanish, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror as aides rushed to him, their faces pale. The broadcast was cut short. Damien's phone buzzed. It was Alastair. "Sir, we have him. He was trying to flee the country on his private jet. Authorities have detained him at the hangar. The SEC has frozen all his assets. It's over. A profound silence filled the room. The screens continued to flash, chronicling the utter destruction of Julian Croft's empire, but the war was won. The ghost had been given a voice, and it had spoken a truth that shattered lies. Ilara let out a shuddering breath, the weight of 2 years of fear and hiding finally lifting from her shoulders. She turned to Damien, tears of relief and liberation streaming down her face. "You're free, Ilara," Damien said, his voice rough with emotion. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You're finally free." "And it's because of you," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "You saw me, you fought for me, you believed in me." "I love you," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly devastating in their truth. "I think I've loved you since you told me about the solar azimuth." A watery laugh escaped her. "I love you, Damien Blackwood, the infuriating, brilliant, unexpectedly heroic man behind the billionaire." He kissed her then, not with the desperate passion of their first kiss, but with a deep, soul-searing certainty that promised a future. It was a kiss of partnership, of shared victory, of a love forged in the fires of adversity. Weeks later, the story was the talk of the world. The fall of Julian Croft, the vindication of Dr. Ilara Vance, and the mysterious, powerful role of Damien Blackwood. But they were no longer in the headlines. They stood on the terrace of the penthouse, now their home, looking out at the city that had been the backdrop to their entire story. Ilara's name was cleared, her brilliance celebrated, but her greatest achievement, she knew, wasn't reclaiming her past, it was building her future. Damien stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on her head. "The maid who disappeared," she mused softly, leaning back against his solid strength. "The billionaire who found her," he finished, his voice a warm rumble against